Hola, muy buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Sean todos bienvenidos al Centro de Estudios Constitucionales. Me da mucho gusto recibir a todas las personas que nos acompañan esta tarde en el auditorio y también saludar a todas las personas que nos siguen desde la plataforma de Casas de la Cultura Jurídica y desde las distintas redes sociales de la Suprema Corte de Justicia de la Nación. Me da mucho gusto recibirlos en esta tarde. Vamos a tener la segunda conferencia del ciclo de conferencia que hemos denominado Hacia una justicia legítima y cercana. Y el día de hoy vamos a estar hablando precisamente sobre cómo fomentar, cómo promover la legitimidad de las fiscalías. Si recuerdan, en nuestra primera sesión estuvimos hablando sobre cómo construir legitimidad en los poderes judiciales. Entonces, la intención de este ciclo de conferencias es que podamos conversar sobre la legitimidad, sobre la credibilidad de las instituciones desde una perspectiva transversal, ¿no? que enfaticemos la importancia que tiene que las distintas instituciones y actores del sistema de justicia promuevan su legitimidad y la confianza ciudadana. Y el día de hoy nos vamos a estar centrando en el tema de las fiscalías, que pues además es uno de los actores más relevantes en el funcionamiento del sistema de justicia. Y pues las fiscalías son una de las instituciones que tienen, digamos, una mayor influencia en el desarrollo de los procesos penales y que, pues lamentablemente, son también al mismo tiempo una de las instituciones que han sido menos estudiadas empíricamente en México, pero en general en todo el mundo. Y para hablar de este tema, me da mucho gusto recibir a Caroline Nobo. Caroline Nobo nos acompaña desde la Universidad de Yale y ella va a estar exponiendo sobre sus investigaciones, sobre el trabajo que han realizado desde el Justice Collaboratory con las fiscalías y todas las estrategias que han desarrollado para promover una mayor credibilidad, una mayor transparencia, una mayor confianza en el trabajo de las fiscalías. Entonces, antes de comenzar y antes de presentar a Caroline, me gustaría comentar rápidamente cuál va a ser la dinámica de la sesión. Como saben, vamos a tener primero una exposición de alrededor de 40 a 60 minutos por parte de Caroline y después vamos a abrir un espacio para preguntas y respuestas. Entonces también desde ahora les invito a que vayan pensando sus preguntas y a que las planteen más adelante. Y bueno, pues sin más me gustaría presentar a Caroline. Caroline Nobo es maestra en Ciencias en Criminología de la Universidad de Pensilvania y licenciada en Sociología por el Mount Holyoke College. Es investigadora académica en Derecho y directora ejecutiva del Justice Collaboratory en la Escuela de Derecho de Yale, donde brinda dirección estratégica y liderazgo a la red única interdisciplinaria de académicos y personal del Justice Collaboratory. Antes de unirse a Yale, fue directora de divulgación de datos para la organización sin fines de lucro Measures for Justice. También trabajó como criminóloga en ABT Associates en Cambridge, Massachusetts, donde se especializó en políticas de control de drogas y realizó auditorías del programa de zonas de alta intensidad de tráfico de drogas para la Oficina Ejecutiva de la Casa Blanca. Comenzó su carrera como asistente de investigación, tanto en la Escuela de Política y Práctica Social de la Universidad de Pensilvania, así como en el Centro para la Prevención de la Violencia y la Seguridad Comunitaria de la Universidad Estatal de Arizona. Su investigación como criminóloga se centra en promover la transparencia y la confianza en el sistema penal. Su experiencia incluye el estudio de la policía, de la violencia armada, de sistemas de datos, de metodologías de la investigación comunitaria y también el movimiento progresista de fiscales. Nobo es autora del libro de 2023, Legitimacy-Based Policing and the Promotion of Community Vitality, y a menudo aparece traduciendo investigaciones para audiencias amplias en medios de comunicación como USA Today. Ha dado conferencias en diversas universidades como la Universidad de Harvard, Yale y la Universidad de Pensilvania, entre muchas otras. Nos da mucho gusto recibirte, Caroline, y pues bienvenida a México, bienvenida al Centro de Estudios Constitucionales y te escuchamos.
Gracias. Buenas tardes. It is my privilege to be here with you today. Thank you so much to Carlos, to the Center for Constitutional Studies and the Supreme Court of Justice for inviting me to Mexico City. This is my first time. I've had a wonderful visit, so thank you. I'm really excited to share with you my talk today, which is about trust and legitimacy in the criminal justice system, but I'm going to have a specific focus today on prosecutors. So as Carlos said, my name is Caroline Nobo. I am faculty where I am the executive director of this center called the Justice Collaboratory. We do social science research, and we are an interdisciplinary group of scholars, researchers, faculty at Yale and other universities. And we are committed to creating a just, effective, and democratic criminal legal system. But we are more broadly concerned with helping to create healthy, vital communities where all citizens can thrive. So with that, let me just start by telling you a little bit about what we're going to cover today in today's lecture. All right. There's a lot, but I'm gonna have a lot of energy, and I'm gonna help you get through an hour of this, maybe less. So I know that my colleague, Tom Tyler, was here, and he spoke a lot about legitimacy and procedural justice as it pertains to the courts and the judges. I'm gonna recap some of what Professor Tyler told you, and then I'm also gonna then start talking specifically about prosecutors. So we're going to start by reviewing legitimacy theory and procedural justice. We're going to talk about why these theories matter for prosecutors, and we're going to talk about that both internally to the culture within these offices and within your system, and then externally, how prosecutors and the system interact with the community and with the citizens of Mexico that they come into interaction with. Then I'm really excited to share something with you, was a movement that's happening in the United States right now called the Progressive Prosecutor Movement. So I'm going to tell you all about this movement, which is very unique to the United States and has been happening for about a decade. And then I'm going to share a little bit about my research with prosecutor offices in the US, and I'll give you some examples of how we've applied legitimacy and procedural justice theories to offices in the United States. And then finally, I'm going to take elementary ideas for you for increasing legitimacy in prosecutors in Mexico. But I'm a beginner, okay? All right, so let's start with legitimacy theory and procedural justice here. So to start with this, I want to invite all of you to think about the traditional goals of justice and the criminal justice system, okay? And I think traditionally when we think of these things, we think about the goal of our criminal justice system is to reduce harm, is to stop crime. But I want you to start thinking for the rest of this talk, how can I think that the goal of the justice system is legitimacy? The goal of the justice system is for the citizens to trust it, okay? So the goal of trust and legitimacy theory is for Mexican citizens who interact with the criminal justice system, that's judges, courts, prosecutors, police, to experience a system as being fair, as being trustworthy, as being transparent, and this will all help create a high perception of legitimacy, okay? These perceptions spread to the wider community, and they help create a democracy of engaged citizens who view legal authority as legitimate, okay? One way to reach legitimacy is to use a framework called procedural justice. We're going to talk a lot about procedural justice. It's about the process, not just the outcome. Now, the great thing is that there are decades of research applying procedural justice to criminal justice settings, to legal settings, and we know it boosts the legitimacy of legal authority, and it encourages people to follow the rules. So I'm not here bringing you some brand new ideas that haven't been tested. These are decades old, and I want you to feel really confident and excited in the ideas that we're sharing, and that you can bring them to your jobs here and see the results as you apply them. The only other thing I'll say here is, again, we want trust and legitimacy because we want people to understand how to be citizens, good civil servants. We want them to understand how to interact with what we call pro-social behavior, positive behavior between one another. And one way people learn this is through observing legal authority. It's through observing judges and police. It's how they learn to be citizens. So again, if they see trustworthiness, if they can mirror that and they see it, again, it's going to increase the legitimacy of the judges, of the prosecutors, of the whole system. So I am a criminologist, which means I study a lot of theory. And I'm going to break it down and pretend that we're in the classroom in Yale, and I'm going to teach you a little bit about criminological theory, okay? And we're going to talk about two different theories. The theory you're probably most familiar with is something called deterrence. And deterrence theory is the most predominant theory that we use to control crime, and we use it to motivate compliance, okay? Deterrence works because there is a certainty and a swiftness of punishment. And that certainty and severity and quickness of punishment is what motivates people to follow the rules. This system can sometimes be overly coercive, it is based in fear, and characteristics of this system, look at the United States, is characterized by mass incarceration, lengthy sentences, use of force, right? So basically, there is voluntary compliance, and then there is forced compliance out of fear. So deterrence is the most common theory. It's the theory we see the most. The theory I'm going to talk about today is legitimacy. So this is in contrast to deterrence. And they both work. They can be used together in tandem, but I really want you to learn about legitimacy today. So what this does is it encourages criminal legal authority to rethink the goals of the justice system, as I said, okay? So that it's not only about controlling crime, but creating a system that is fair and that promotes safety, and a big picture of safety, right? Safety is not just the absence of harm. Safety is also the presence of good. The presence of good things are what make people safe, not just the absence of crime. And also, legitimacy helps to create a democracy where people trust authority, and it helps people follow the rules because the rules are fair and transparent. Okay, so now you have your lesson, your Yale lesson in theory, okay? So next, let's talk about how do you build trust, right? So now we understand, we're on the same page, trust is important, we want to be legitimate. How do you get there? You get there through a framework called procedural justice. And there are 4 parts to procedural justice. There is neutrality, which means decisions are unbiased and they are guided by transparent reasoning. Respect. All people are treated with respect and dignity. Voice. Everyone is given an opportunity, a chance to tell their side of the story. And finally, trustworthiness. Decision makers convey trustworthy motives about those impacted by their decisions. So, I'm going to give you some examples. An example of neutrality or transparent thinking would be, okay, there are sentencing guidelines. There's maybe a mandatory and a minimum sentence for something. I want to understand how these were created. Why are there a mandatory and minimum sentence? I want to see that if someone with a similar case was sentenced differently than someone else, I need to understand a transparent reasoning so that I can see that people are making neutral decisions, right? That there's no bias in how people are being treated in the court. We deal with this a lot in the United States with people of color. We have a long history of incarcerating black men at a higher rate than other people. That affects procedural justice because people can see the system's not neutral, it's not transparent. Voice, we see voice a lot. A great way to exercise voice in the criminal legal system is to give victims a chance to share their side of the story with prosecutors, with their defense attorneys, also with judges. Respect. You cannot underestimate what it means to address someone in a court setting respectfully. You don't need to call them the defendant, the convicted, the felon, the person in prison. No, you address them by their name. Miss Nobo, Mr. Carlos, right? We take time to be polite and address people with respect and dignity. And finally, trustworthiness, and this is really the hardest one, because we have to, as people who work in the system, you have to convince people that you have their best interests at heart. You've never met them, you don't know them, but you have to, in those limited interactions, make it clear that they can trust you, and that they are going to make changes that are for the better of the community and that are the better for you. So now we have our theory and we have the way we get there, right? So why does legitimacy matter? Okay, what we see here is a flow chart that shows us the behavior of the authority, and then that trickles down to how the community perceives the behaviors, and then we have a change in behavioral outcomes by the community, okay? So we want people to follow the rules, we want people to comply with the law. So if we see authorities, this is just a flow chart, if we see authorities allowing people to have voice, we see them acting with neutrality, we see legal authority prosecutors being trustworthy, being respectful, then the community is going to see that, and they're going to see, oh, okay, the prosecutors, the legal authority, they're serving my best interests. I can respect them because they're respecting me. And then finally, what we see, the last thing, is we see behavioral outcomes. And this is when those working in the system, your job gets easier, right? Because people are going to have a voluntary respect for rules and the law. They're not following the rules because they're afraid of getting punished. They're following the rules because they believe in them. They believe in you. They believe that you're doing the right thing. And so they start cooperating with authorities. They start engaging with the justice system in a better way. And then internally, prosecutors, judges, attorneys, they start to feel less stressed because they're not every day going into an interaction that feels argumentative, that feels adversarial. Instead, they're thinking, wow, this person wants to follow the rules. This person trusts me. And so as procedural justice goes up, we see trust in the system go up, and we see the actors in the system, like the prosecutors, we see their stress levels go down and their enjoyment of their job go up. So, as I started by saying, one of the reasons I love talking about this is that it is theory-driven, but it is evidence-based. This is serious science that has had a serious impact in the way the criminal legal system operates in the United States. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the quick history, so again, you really understand how we got here today. So procedural justice actually started in corporations, in companies, okay? It started in sort of organizational management theory, how people working in big companies could make sure their employees were satisfied, and then that they were communicating this out to the clients. Because if you have a bunch of people working for, let's say, a giant pharmaceutical company who aren't paid well and don't get good time off, and maybe their bosses aren't nice people, then that means when they're interacting with clients, they're kind of grumpy because they're not having a good experience at work. So it started in this setting, right? How can we make big companies, people working in them happier so they interact better with the clients? And then we started using this theory, Tom Tyler and Tracy Mears, to put this research in policing and court settings. And then we started doing actual training, spending days embedded within these agencies, training them on how to do these things. And then we started seeing very initial resources for prosecutors, really high-level stuff. Here's some pamphlets, here's like I'm doing, let me come and lecture to you for an hour about this. And then we even started seeing procedural justice applied in probation, in parole. We started seeing procedural justice put in prisons, training correctional officers to treat the people incarcerated with respect. And then you'll see you are here. Now we're at the point where we're taking these theories and we're applying them more broadly to prosecutors' offices. And through this research, we know to ask very specific questions to help legal authority achieve these high perceptions, okay? So we know to say, how do citizens and litigants assess for fairness and trust? How do you find out, right? How do you find out if someone trusts the system? Well, you have to survey them, and you have to survey them on their behaviors, right? And you have to track that over time. We've been able to ask what practices by a prosecutor will impact the perception of fairness. And then finally, we've been able to ask, how can we support professionals working in this space to implement these ideas? How can we teach them? How can we really let them know how to do this? And then enhance these practices over time so they just keep getting better. So as I mentioned in the timeline, you know, all of this work started sort of with internal procedural justice. So working on building trust and legitimacy means you have to do both internal culture change before you can be effective in promoting a legitimacy with external groups like the community, okay? And I think this is very important, especially in Mexico, where your system has only since, I believe, 2008 sort of transitioned to oral arguments with people really having interaction together. So it's very important that the internal procedural justice is clicking, right? And that people working together in the system respect each other, they're treating each other fairly, everyone's getting a chance to share. Now, we learned this lesson sort of the hard way with police in America. So we went to these big cities in America to work with the police, and we started telling the police, okay, we want you to treat people with dignity, right? We want everyone to have a very transparent experience. And the police said, I don't feel this way in my own agency. Like, I don't really feel like I understand what my boss wants me to do. I don't feel like I'm aligned with the values of my agency. So we're sitting here saying, oh, do all this to the community, and they're saying, whoa, 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 I need a moment to work on this for me before I can be expected to carry this out into the people that I work with on the street. So, you know, this is one of the big lessons we've learned, and when we start working with prosecutor offices, we'll spend a year doing nothing but internal procedural justice. How do the prosecutors get along with the legal secretaries? How do they get along with the paralegals? How do they get along with the victim witness advocates? You know, we need to have cohesion inside the office before we start pushing them to try this in external settings. And so again, this is just some of the background here. So learned lessons from early implementation. If employees and staff experience procedural justice internally at their workplace, then they are more likely to adopt the principles and use them externally. So what does this all mean? Basically what this means is that, and if you remember at the beginning, I told you I want you to really rethink what justice means. We've been trained and socialized to think that justice means someone gets a guilty verdict, right? Someone gets arrested. And research shows us that justice is not just about the process, it's not about the outcome, but it's about the process. And process accounts for a lot of how people assess whether or not they've experienced justice. And again, this is a little counterintuitive. Process includes two general components. It includes interactions, and it includes the decision making. Good news is that process is largely within our control. Process is largely within the control of the criminal legal system. And how you interact with people, that's also something you get to make your own decisions. So there's a range of outcomes. We can't control the outcomes, but we can control the process, right? And we can control how we interact with people. So it's very important when you're thinking about legitimacy. How is the process from start to finish legitimate? Not just, oh, are they getting a guilty verdict and so they feel good at the end of the day? I'm going to show you something here. So what I have here is some research. And on the x-axis, what you see is decision acceptance. And on the y-axis, you're seeing the strength of the connection. So we have three different things here that are going to predict if someone going through the system has a favorable, they feel satisfied. We'll use that word, satisfied. Are you satisfied at the end of this process? And so one of them is the outcome favorability. They feel like they got the outcome they wanted. That's in blue. Yellow is fairness. Did they feel like the outcome was fair? And then the green is process. Did you feel like the process was just? Did you feel like the process was fair? What you can see is by far the strongest indicator of accepting the decision at the end of a case is, did they feel like the process was fair and the process was transparent? This is very compelling evidence to think about how intentional you are when you're interacting with people, right? Because if you're being sort of flippant and not taking your time, but you get the verdict, they're probably going to walk away and say, you know, it is guilty, but I feel very confused about what happened. I don't feel like I was heard. I don't feel good about what just went down. So last thing here, I just wanted to come back to this slide because we're going to transition now to talk specifically about prosecutors. And so why does this matter to prosecutors? If we follow this trickling flow chart, people are going to be more willing to assist with investigations, to provide information, to cooperate as a victim, to participate as a witness if they are experiencing these things. That makes everyone's job easier. It's also going to help attract higher quality and more prosecutors. Because the prosecutor role has changed pretty recently, I think there's still a lot of growth that can happen in Mexico to attract the best young lawyers and attorneys into this field. So if the word is that being a prosecutor is a good job, it's not too stressful, my victims, my witnesses are cooperating, it's going to allow you to attract higher quality professionals into this role. All good, Carlos? Okay, all right. So let's talk about now the progressive prosecutor movement. And this is a term this is like the exact term what we use in the United States. It is a near universally accepted principle that prosecutors are the most powerful actors in the US criminal legal system. In response to this, a movement has emerged, and it is to elect progressive district attorneys, and we can use the power of a, for good prosecutor to end things like mass incarceration. So I'm going to talk about all the different ways this movement does this, but to summarize that, prosecutors can decline to prosecute low-level crimes. They can expand diversion programs. They start replacing sort of hard-line, long-term prosecutors with more reform-minded outsiders. And this movement has received support from academics, activists, presidential candidates, even a Supreme Court justice has stepped up to endorse this movement. And we feel it's really key to the legitimacy of the overall criminal legal system in the United States. And I will say, it's someone who studies this, it's been fascinating over the last decade to see it really take hold. So let's talk a little bit about prosecutors in the United States. We have, justice in the United States is interesting. People think of it as one system, right? The United States criminal justice system. But we have more than 3,000 counties in America, and every county has its own prosecutor and its own judge and its own police. So really we have 3,000 justice systems in America. So because of that, there's a lot of power at the local level to make change. So we have 2,400 chief prosecutors in the United States. Most of them are elected. For a long time, these elections were uncontested. Someone would run, they got elected. Now, where people are being challenged to be more progressive, there are more people running against one another for prosecutor. Again, as I said, they have a lot of power within the criminal legal system. In the United States, we've seen a steady decline in crime over the last 30, 40 years, and these falling crime rates have given space to sort of reimagine this tough-on-crime prosecutor to a prosecutor who's focused more on fairness. So this movement really began in earnest in 2015. It started in the largest cities in the United States, cities like Seattle, New York City, Milwaukee. These are places with serious violent crime problems, okay? We're not talking about a community that's already safe, and they're deciding, I'm gonna try something new because I have nothing to lose. It has then spread to the other large cities, so a lot of media coverage. Philadelphia, Chicago, San Francisco have all elected progressive prosecutors over the last decade. So what I'm trying to show you is that these group of prosecutors were able to create an entire social movement for change just by running on a platform of legitimacy, basically. There are billionaire philanthropists who fund the elections of prosecutors. I mean, this is mind-blowing for people to think, right? That a billionaire is gonna say, I want the district attorney of some county to win because he believes in criminal justice reform. And The thing is for this sort of reform to work, it requires a lot of trust in the system and a lot of trust in the people you are electing, because they are running on progressive platforms, and then they have to deliver because they are up for election again in 2 to 4 years. So it's not a performance. It's not just for talk. They are really being held to their promises, and we're starting to see the policies reflect that. So I want to just talk about what this looks like in action, okay? So as I said, it's not for show. They are putting actions and policy changes where they've made promises. So they are updating their policies, and they are focusing again on changes that are going to promote fairness in the system and also end mass incarceration. The term that we use in the United States is called decarceral. They want to decarcerate, so we're moving away from incarceration. The very interesting thing is that the prosecutors can do this without having to change any laws. They can decline to prosecute these certain low-level cases, these low-level crimes. That can be, a low-level marijuana charge. It could be a petty theft, small cases like this. Or they can just dismiss the case altogether. They also, within their offices, they can create diversion programs. And these diversion programs aren't just, again, for substance abuse disorder. They're not just for people who, for veterans courts. They're starting to create diversion programs for violent crimes, for gun cases, for domestic violence cases, because they're starting to understand that being overly punitive is not helping, reach this goal of safety. And then they're also replacing old school prosecutors with reform-minded new hires. So there's a very popular, or unpopular, depending who you are, district attorney in Philadelphia. His name's Larry Krasner. One thing he did is he came into this office and he basically fired all of the old prosecutors because he said, I don't feel like you can get on board. I don't think you can get on board with my new culture, and I'm going to fire you, and I'm going to hire a bunch of new prosecutors who are aligned with my values, who are aligned with the mission of this office. Takes guts. And so the movement has been successful. We have seen in these cities jail populations decreasing by 40% or more. We've seen the recidivism rates are also down. And we've seen that these prosecutors are getting elected time and time again. Some of the criticisms of this is that, people who believe in abolition say that, well, why are we still giving money to prosecutors? Let's take that money, let's give it to a better defense attorney. Let's create more social services. So that's one criticism. And the other one is that it can create internal conflict among the agencies, right? So police are arresting people, police are bringing people to the prosecutor, and then the prosecutors are not moving forward with charges. So it's undercutting the police. So that's one of the criticisms. And when we work with prosecutor offices that are progressive, my center, we do this. We help them with this. We say, this is an internal procedural justice thing. Are you being transparent? Are you listening to the police about why they feel upset? So again, it's very important to have those good relationships across multiple stakeholders. Okay, I wanted to share a couple more examples. So, progressive prosecution in action. Another thing we've seen that's really interesting, obviously I work at Yale Law School, one of the best law schools in the country, and we're seeing that a lot of new lawyers who are considering taking prosecutor jobs at progressive offices, where typically they would be interested in a public interest job at a public defender office, or maybe they would want to clerk, or they'd want to go work for a big firm. They feel very inspired by this movement and this reform, and they want to be a part of it, and they want to work for these leaders. We've also seen something which is the creation of a conviction integrity unit, which is a group of prosecutors that go back and review past cases for past harms, and they try and repair those harms, and they fight to have the cases appealed and overturned so people can be released based on the standard of the current time. Again, really progressive for a prosecutor's office to be taking this on, to look back at past cases and say, oh, we messed up. We need to go back and fix this. Again, we've seen expansion of diversion programs into violent crimes. I'm working with 4 different offices in the United States right now to divert gun violence cases from traditional prosecution. And I'm sure you know we have a horrible gun violence problem in our country. So it's amazing that people are trying to tackle that within the system. And they're offering more pretrial release without a cash bail requirement. So again, we're seeing our jail populations go down in tandem because they're not saying that everyone needs to be held on a cash bail. And again, sort of the last thing I'll say about this, it's very important that this work is not performing fairness, but is sincere, right? In some cities, this work is really repairing harm against people of color for generations, right? They're doing very meaningful work to, if you're familiar with the term reparations, right, to make good on past harms. And these gestures of reconciliation, they have to be legitimate, or they have the negative effect. People aren't stupid. They can tell when someone's just saying something to get elected. They can tell when someone's just saying something because they want a job. So we have to really hold prosecutors in the United States, Mexico, wherever, we have to hold them accountable to what they promise if we want to see sustainable social change. So in 2021, myself and some other partners saw this progressive prosecutor movement as an opportunity to work with these offices that were interested in improving their relationship with the community. And we decided, well, let's bring the principles of procedural justice and legitimacy to long-term partnerships with some of the largest prosecutor offices in the country. We knew that some of these leaders were committed to doing better, some of these chief prosecutors, but they needed help across a whole range of issues, and they wanted to make sure that what they were doing was rooted in the science. So this is how our project, our research got started. I'm going to share a little bit about that research. Okay. So the name of the project is called Elevating Trust and Legitimacy with Prosecutors. This was started by the Justice Collaboratory at Yale Law School. We partnered with 2 other organizations. One is called Lagrada Consulting, and the other is a national organization of prosecuting attorneys. So the national organization came to us and said, can you help our prosecutors learn these skills? We started with 1 very large district attorney office, 2 city attorney offices, and we made people apply. We made them send us a proposal and say, I want to do this, and this is why you should pick my office. And that was really important for buy-in because they were coming to us being like, thank you, help me. We looked at things like the office size, the structure. It was very important that the leadership was committed, and not just the chief, but the top several layers of leadership in the office. We looked at their existing investments. We looked at then also, could we replicate nationally some of the things we're going to do in these local offices? And we looked for offices that did have undeveloped opportunities for community interaction. And we're currently lacking an existing feedback mechanism, right? So they weren't surveying people. They really didn't know how people were experiencing their interactions with the prosecutor's office. So that's how we picked the offices. Okay, so I'm going to take you through this because I want to make it clear that these were not quick one-day trainings. They were long-term, sustained partnerships over a period of 2 years, and we still work with all of them. We check in with them every month. It was really not a one and done. So the first thing we did is we did a planning and assessment stage where all we did was just sit and listen. We listened to them talk about their policies. We listened to them talking about, what their changes were, what their challenges were. We talked to everyone from the receptionist at the front desk to the chief prosecutor. And that process can take anywhere from 6 months to 8 months because we really wanted to understand what was going on internally. Then we did a pre-survey. So we surveyed both the staff and the attorneys in the office on their perceptions of procedural justice internally. We asked them about their stress levels. We asked them how they enjoyed their life. We asked them, did they feel like people trusted them? Very long, detailed, vetted instrument based in psychology scales, based in science. So that was our baseline. We then did site visits, so the entire team went and sat with these offices and had in-person meetings several times. We had workshops, and then we moved into the training stage. So we offered workshops and staff trainings to procedural justice. Again, we went across the entire office. We held training on procedural justice for the people who ran the switchboard when you called in, because it turns out the person who answers the phone is actually the person who has the most interaction with the community, right? And she or he really needs to understand procedural justice. And we did a large staff training. We did trainings just with management. We did trainings just with the line prosecutors, all of that. After we did all of this, we decided to co-design. So that means we worked in tandem to create a procedural justice intervention or a program. I'm going to talk more about this. And this involved an acute problem diagnosis. So we looked at the office and we said, you have a problem with this. You have a problem with transparency. You have a problem with respect. And we're going to figure out what the exact problem is, and we're going to teach you how to change it using legitimacy. And then we watched and helped the office make those actual changes in their policies and practices. And then we did a post-survey with all of the staff to follow up. Oh, and I forgot one thing in here. And doing this, we also surveyed victims. We did and I'll tell you more about that. And then the final part is we did a long-term follow-up call. So we meet with these offices quarterly. The entire team gets back on the phone. We say, what challenges are you experiencing? How's that new policy working? That kind of thing. So this is the flow chart of how this worked. We wanted to leave the prosecutors with a set of skills that they could use to address issues moving forward, not just the one time. So we helped them diagnose this acute problem, sort of a legitimacy problem, and then we figured out the underlying tension. So was it a transparency issue? Was it a voice issue? Was it a respect issue? Or was it a trust issue? And then we used the framework of procedural justice to help them fix this problem. And then the goal is that by doing this exercise, the offices are going to be able to independently solve problems of legitimacy moving forward without us there helping them. Though we still talk to them a lot, make sure they're okay. So I wanted to give you some examples of what this would look like in an office. So one way we did this was sort of drafting and communicating written materials. And this was sort of an obvious and easy way to start, because we're reading letters that they're sending victims, and we're reading letters that they're sending the accused, and it's like so hard to understand, and they sound very scary. And we're thinking, gosh, like if I got this letter, I'd feel really intimidated. So we started fixing language. So now the letters say, we value treating all community members with dignity and respect. For victims, this means participant intake. So let's say a prosecutor is going to divert you to a drug treatment program, and instead of going to jail, we value treating all community members with dignity and respect. For participants in this program, this means. A big issue we confront with prosecutors and people working in the criminal justice system is they feel like they can't be transparent. They say, oh, I don't want to give away any details to this case. I don't want to share any information. So then that ends up just looking like they're being secretive and they're hiding, when the truth is, like, they really feel like they'd be offending someone's rights if they told the whole story. So we help them come up with language. They say, we are committed to transparency, but out of respect for the victim, we are only going to answer questions about the timeliness of the case. Like very specific, so people understand the expectations. So that's one example. So one thing we found in this work is, because remember we did the pre-surveys and the post-surveys, surveys, and in those surveys, we did psychological scales of people's well-being, of the prosecutors' well-being. And what we noticed is that over the course of this project, as the internal legitimacy of the office started going up, the prosecutors started reporting lower stress levels in their job. So they were feeling better about themselves. They felt like, I'm really upholding justice. I'm coming to work every day. I'm promoting a system that's fair. My boss is really, dialed into me, helping me. So that was huge for us, that we could see that the prosecutors were having positive benefits in their jobs. We also decided to survey the victims. We found that the prosecutors, when thinking about the community, really were most interested in understanding how the victims felt through the process. So at Yale, we hired a group of Yale undergraduate students to call about 1,400 victims on the phone, a cold call. Their cases had already been closed, there had been a disposition, and they called, and the survey was, of course, completely voluntary, but we asked them to share about their experiences and their interactions with the prosecutor and the victim advocate, again, the entire office. And again, you'll see here that when we're asking them, okay, tell me overall, how satisfied are you with what happened in your case? And yes, they say the outcome was fair, that matters, but far and away, their perception of the process being fair, procedural justice, was most likely to indicate that the victim would walk away saying, I feel satisfied with what happened today. And that's justice, right? That's justice, that your victim feels safe in this very holistic way. So we also wanted to track some outcomes to see in real life, how does this make the prosecutors' jobs easier? Are people following the rules, right? Are they showing up to court? So we tracked things like, are the defendants, are the accused, are they showing up and complying with mandates around programming, that's probation, parole, maybe a treatment program? Are we seeing fewer incidents in the courtroom, fewer outbursts, anger, fewer FTAs, failure to appear? So we see people are coming to court more instead of just not showing up. We're seeing higher clearance rates. Clearance rate means that the police have a crime and they want to clear that crime by finding who committed it and moving forward with charges. To clear a crime, you need witnesses and you need your community to participate and trust you and tell you what's happening. So that's good. That means the community trust levels are going up if the clearance rates are going up. And then finally, we want to see reduced recidivism, so people are not coming back to the system repeatedly. Another example of seeing this in action is a lot of these progressive offices create something called diversion programs, which I think Carlos has told me you have diversion programs here in Mexico. And what we wanted to do, so we helped, one of the sort of legitimacy interventions we did in these offices was to create diversion programs. So we had an office that said, I want to start diverting low-level gun cases. I don't want them to go through traditional prosecution. And we said, okay, well, let's follow procedural justice and legitimacy from the very beginning. So when we create a diversion program, let's start by even articulating the motivation behind the program. So can I be very transparent in why we're creating a diversion program? And can I show that I'm trustworthy? So they might say something like, we've decided to create a gun diversion program because we're noticing a lot of young men are coming through the criminal justice system, not because they want to harm someone, but because guns are seen as a respect on the street. They want to feel safe. They're being playful for the guns, and they're ending up in prison. We don't want to do that. So that's why we're creating this program. Okay, that makes sense. People get that. And then we start with this, again, internal procedural justice between the different agencies. So can we create a diversion program that the judges support, that the police support, that the defense attorney supports, and the prosecutor? So we want everyone aligned before we start prosecutor just starts making up new programs. We also give an opportunity for the participants, so the accused, the defendants, to have a voice in this. We encourage them to pay attention to the process of the program. So let's say you're diverted. You're diverted from traditional prosecution. You get to go to a special program. Maybe you fail the program. You don't meet all the requirements, so you're going to have to go back to court. But if you still felt that the program was treating you with dignity and respect, that you had a chance, at least you were given a chance to do better, you're going to leave with overall satisfaction of that program, even if you failed out of it. And then finally, we talk a lot about measuring success, and we want people to get creative. What does success look like as a prosecutor that's creative? Okay, it doesn't just have to be a typical outcome. Well, my case was successful because I got a guilty verdict and they went to prison. Success might also be procedural justice, right? So we encourage them to start tracking things that they normally never would have tracked in a data sense. So we've talked a lot about the theory. We've talked about the social movement in the United States. So you've seen what this looks like in the United States and the really promising evidence and the research. As a non-expert on Mexico's criminal legal system, I've really tried to take time to learn over the last couple of months in preparation for being here today. And I just wanted to share some ideas, and in doing so, invite you to participate in a conversation with me about these ideas and ask any questions. So I'll share these last couple of recommendations, and then I think we'll hand it over for... Great, okay. So, the system in Mexico, your criminal legal system, it does not invite citizen involvement. And what I mean by that is that you don't have a jury system, okay? In the United States, people sort of start with a high level of legitimacy because they get to participate actively. They get to go to court, they get to listen, they get to help pass judgment. They are required to understand the way the criminal legal system operates in the country. Now, if you're not actively participating in it, it can be opaque. It can be hard to understand. So, I have been talking to Carlos a little bit about, is court open? Can people go and observe court? Are victims allowed to share a statement during court? And he said yes. I think this would be a great way to encourage legitimacy, is to encourage people to court watch. There are programs across the United States where they work with people to get volunteers to just go and watch court and be able to ask questions. So because your system is a little closed off, it would be, I think, great for legitimacy if you could get more people to voluntarily watch court and feel like they're involved in some way. And maybe someday you'll get a jury system, who knows? You guys like to amend a lot, so. Finally, the oral arguments are still new. So there's certainly an opportunity to continue to improve relationships between the prosecutors, the judges, and your defense attorneys. It might be worth it to have a joint training with all three parties, a joint workshop, something that's really focused on legitimacy to get this relationship to a point that's not so adversarial, but everyone's on the same page, working together, again, for the same goal. The goal is we want our system to be legitimate. How can we work together as the three legal authorities to reach this goal? Another one that we've had a lot of success with in the States is to get what we call user feedback. So surveys of litigants, surveys of victims, surveys of the prosecutors, surveys of the judges. You can even survey the general public on their perceptions of prosecutors. We know from research that people are actually pretty good at being able to say, I know what the judge does, I know what the prosecutor does, I know what a police person does. So you can encourage, again, citizen involvement and engagement by asking them about their perceptions of the system. and then being very transparent and publishing the results of those surveys. That's a big, no-no, is to survey people and then not share what you've learned. Again, just train prosecutors, train them on legitimacy, train them on procedural justice. There are people all over the world who are doing this work, and this is their full-time job. They travel around the world and they train people on legitimacy, and they train them on how to incorporate procedural justice. I would suggest you review external materials for transparency. We talked about this, like in one office we found that the letters that went out to victims, the language was very inaccessible, and that took like a week for them to rewrite that letter into language that felt more welcoming to the victims to participate. Also, I've seen some of the websites. The websites could be better. Your federal prosecutor website is very flashy. It's good. It looks really nice. But the state prosecutors don't have the same thing, and they're sort of empty. The prosecutor websites could have contact information. They could have frequently asked questions. They could have a flow chart, what to expect. You can electronic case lookup. Again, some of this stuff exists in a really nice platform on the federal level, but again, justice is very local. Communities experience justice at the local level, and so we need that to happen across the entire system. And then again, just to continue to encourage public input and ensure citizen participation. I know that this has been worked into some of the new reforms, but hasn't, moved all the way to implementation. I think having prosecutors lobby for this and really hold the government accountable, say, listen, we want people to be involved. We want them to know what we're doing. So those are just some of my ideas. And again, I really invite you. We can have a conversation now. I'm happy to answer any questions or talk more about these suggestions. Okay, thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Caroline, por la exposición y además porque fue una exposición muy rica en ejemplos y también como en casos y en estrategias específicas que pueden ser muy útiles para reflexionar sobre cómo promover la legitimidad en las fiscalías. Ahora, como les comenté al principio, vamos a tener un momento para preguntas y respuestas, entonces, si te parece bien, Caroline, podemos hacer rondas de 3 preguntas y así damos un espacio para que respondas. No sé, alguien aquí en la audiencia que quiera participar, alcen la mano y les pasan el micrófono. Bueno, aquí tenemos la primera pregunta de este lado.
Buenas tardes. Yo quisiera preguntar sobre los diversion programs. ¿Cómo sería o cómo es la mejor opción para escoger la clase de delitos que van a hacer para esos programas? Porque escuché como gun violence y drug-related cases, pero si escuché bien también dijo como violencia familiar. Entonces no pensaría que esa sería una clase de delito que sería elegible para esa clase de programa. Sin embargo, tal vez no se trata acerca del bien jurídico protegido o del valor que protegen, sino, no sé, otras características que hacen a ciertos delitos elegibles para esos programas. Y otra cosa que quería preguntar era que cuando se habla un poco de estos programas de Progressive Prosecutor Movement, siempre se hace la diferencia entre Estados Unidos y México porque las fiscalías y las policías de México tienen mucho menos presupuesto que las fiscalías estadounidenses. Entonces es como que en las fiscalías mexicanas siempre existe la preocupación de los servidores públicos de que están como con una gran carga de trabajo, mal pagados, y esa es como la razón que los servidores públicos dan para su desempeño, pero en Estados Unidos tienen mejores presupuestos y también se presentan algunos problemas similares, o tal vez son diferentes y por eso la forma de solucionarlos son diferentes, no sé.
Muy bien. ¿Alguna otra? Bueno, de este lado. Bueno, ahí hay otra y otra. Ahí había una primero. Y después acá.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Muchas gracias por la ponencia. Mi pregunta va más orientada hacia estas estrategias para México. Y primero que nada, si hay o debería de haber algún cambio y si es así, el lapso de tiempo estimado para aplicar para mejorar de alguna manera esta confianza y legitimidad en comunidades indígenas, y pues la manera en la que se podría aplicar ese cambio, o ese ajuste en las estrategias, pues pensándolo más para México. Muchas gracias.
Y aquí tenemos una tercera.
Muchas gracias. Yo tengo una pregunta sobre esto que mencionaba al inicio, sobre cómo también es necesario alinear estas políticas que se gestan en las fiscalías desde la justicia procedimental con las políticas, los intereses, las motivaciones de otras autoridades como policía, como cortes. Eso no es fácil porque también hay ciertas expectativas sobre lo que la policía debe hacer en un sistema de justicia o cómo deben resolver los tribunales ciertos casos. Y eso es algo que no es fácil de hacer, por más que haya una política progresiva o progresista, diríamos acá supongo, en fiscalías, ¿no?
Perfecto. Si les parece bien, utilizamos este tiempo para responder estas preguntas y después…
Okay, great. So first of all, great questions, really good questions. Thank you. You're making my job easy. So let's start here. The diversion programs, what crimes to pick that are most eligible? I think, first of all, it's a very local issue. And I think you have to look at your community. You have to listen to what your community is asking for. So, for example, talking about the gun violence cases, I think you're seeing the diversion programs because we have a federal government in the United States that is not making progress on gun reform the way communities want it to be. So prosecutors are saying, okay, what can we do? How can we be receptive to this, epidemic of gun violence in our country? So that's one thing, right? They're really listening to local needs. The other thing has to do just with the population of the jail. So jails cost a lot of money, and again, in the United States, we mass incarcerate. So I think when prosecutors are thinking about what kind of cases, they're saying, okay, I'm trying to do something progressive. Going to your question about getting people on board, it's a little back and forth. So maybe the sheriff has a jail that's overflowing. If I can reduce his jail population and also not risk public safety at the same time, maybe he's going to be more willing to work with me when I don't want to prosecute a low-level crime. So again, I think it has to do with the local need, and again, sometimes just who's moving through the jail. Now, as far as things like domestic violence diversion, it is really risky. And I'd say the majority of prosecutors in the United States would not touch a domestic violence diversion program with a 10-foot pole. They're like, oh, no. But there are progressive prosecutors who've been doing this for so long, they feel like they have the support of the local council, of judges to try it. And they start it very small. They start it with certain, boundaries. But, we know that putting someone in jail for domestic violence doesn't stop them from hitting their partner again. And people want everyone to be safe. So they want to try new things with the hope that they work. But sometimes it is really risky, and there's a lot of prosecutors who wouldn't want to try it. Does that answer enough? Okay, great. And the budgets. Yeah, okay. There's no money. This is a problem in the States too, which is, I don't know if you saw in one of my slides, I mentioned a lot of foundations and philanthropists and billionaires are now funding this work. Like all of these programs you saw, not a penny came from the state, from the government. It was all funded by private foundations and private philanthropists who want to see change. I don't know much about the philanthropy culture in Mexico, but in the United States, it's become very, for better or worse, it's become very cool to give your money to criminal justice reform. So we are able to make up some budget gaps with private support. So strategy, how long does this take to happen? So I want to, the closest that I can do to compare indigenous to something we might face in the United States is a community that is historically Black, historically brown, and has seen harm over generations from police and from the courts. This, and we talk about trust as a bank, okay? So when you have a dollar bill and you put money in the bank, you get $1. But if you spend $30, you're negative $30, and then they charge you a fine, so you're actually like negative $25. So you have to do all this extra work to get back to being positive. And this is how I equate building trust with communities that are indigenous and building communities that have been historically harmed. You're gonna have to work that much harder and that much longer and be that much more intentional because you're such a deficit. It does not mean we don't see results quickly. We do. Some of these projects are 6 months and people are reporting that their interactions are more positive. You're going to have a future speaker, Rodrigo Canales, who's done a lot of work in Mexico with the police, and he's been able to demonstrate, over a short period of time, people feeling that they have more trust in the police, but especially with communities that have experienced serious past harm over generations, it takes a little longer. And I think, and one last thing on this, it's really important to involve them in these conversations. So this is called community participatory action, which is a methodology that says we're going to create policies, we're going to create trust-building actions in conversation with the community, in conversation with the indigenous, whomever, right? And they actually become part of the team. They get paid, they're embedded within the team, and they co-create the policies together from the very beginning. And again, that really fosters legitimacy because they feel like they've had a voice in the process. Is that useful? Okay, great, thank you. So in your question sort of about aligning across different jurisdictions, I would say if you ask the progressive prosecutors what their #1 barrier to change is, that's what they would say. And in some cities, it's bad, it's unfortunate. The police and the prosecutors cannot get on the same page. And the prosecutors just find ways to work around it. In Boston, Massachusetts, there was a progressive prosecutor named Rachel Rollins, and before Rachel even took office, she wrote a whole memo that said, I'm not going to prosecute any of these crimes, before she even took office. And the police tried to, I think they put like a warrant out for her arrest, basically, that said, well, she's unethical, she's not going to be upholding the law, before she even took office. So you can imagine how adversarial that relationship was. And she had run on a platform of being progressive and felt like, well, I have a lot of promises to keep, and I'm not going to let the police stand in my way. So that took a lot of relationship building. And in some communities, I don't think it happens. I think they just stay in conflict, unfortunately. I will say that in the United States, prosecutors have a longer tenure. They tend to stay in their roles as chief prosecutors and as line prosecutors for a long time. And police chiefs turn over much more quickly. They usually stay 2 or 3 years and a new chief of police comes. So, it's politics, right? They're going to try and maybe find a leader who's more aligned to be the next chief or something like that. And again, I think it's a very good example of the internal trust building that needs to happen, that all of the agencies need to be on board.
Muchas gracias, Caroline. Tenemos más preguntas. Tenemos una pregunta por aquí.
Buenas tardes. En primer lugar, muchas gracias por la conferencia. Mi pregunta es, ¿cuál ha sido como la experiencia o cómo ha sido el proceso para que las fiscalías que han aplicado este programa acompañado por ustedes logren convertirlo en un programa sostenible en el tiempo? Y sobre todo cuando hay elecciones, cuando ese programa se ha aplicado y hay un posible cambio de fiscal, lo que puede implicar un cambio en el enfoque de la política. Y la conecto con otra pregunta muy concreta y relacionada con esto. Si han vivido la experiencia de cómo esta apuesta académica y teórica de la justicia procedimental se ha convertido en propuesta política de un candidato. ¿Cómo ha sido esa experiencia o ese proceso de convertirlo en una apuesta política para ganar unas elecciones? Gracias.
Muy bien. ¿Alguna otra pregunta? De este lado tenemos. Bueno, aquí, perdón, pero sí, adelante.
Bueno, mencionó que se requiere de un cambio en la cultura interna dentro de las instituciones. Entonces, ¿de qué manera debe ser la capacitación, por ejemplo, de todo el personal? Porque muchas veces las fiscalías revictimizan a las mujeres o a personas que pertenecen a grupos en situación de vulnerabilidad. ¿Cómo cambias esos prejuicios que tienen las personas dentro de las fiscalías? Gracias.
Gracias. Ahora sí, de ese lado.
Yo tengo dos preguntas, una relacionada con la anterior. Hay estudios que muestran que en México las policías y las fiscalías no persiguen los mismos objetivos que las leyes. Tal vez tengo en realidad muchas preguntas, pero voy a tratar de concretarlas. En Estados Unidos, la actuación de la policía podríamos decir que está principalmente guiada por hacer cumplir la ley. Y si esto es así, ¿hay algún abordaje que podría incluir de manera más sistémica alguna estrategia para modificar la actuación y los incentivos que persiguen las policías y las fiscalías para que no persigan hacer más dinero, salir de situaciones de pobreza o de marginación, colaborar con el crimen organizado, sino hacer cumplir la ley y que esto contribuya a esta visión de justicia procedimental? Esa sería una. Y la otra sería en relación con el financiamiento. En México, las campañas políticas no pueden ser, al menos oficialmente, financiadas por particulares. ¿Tendrías alguna idea de cómo conseguir, cómo incentivar que los millonarios tengan voluntad para aportar dinero a esto que en México no es cool, no es sexy, no es atractivo?
Go ahead.
I can go?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about your question first and sustainability. This is something I'm really interested in, actually, and I think it's probably where my research is going to go over the next couple of years, because inevitably these wonderful leaders leave office. And we're actually seeing this election year, 2 of them in the United States finally retire after being very committed for decades. So that's in Chicago, Kim Fox is leaving, and Milwaukee, John Chisholm. Both of these offices I am actively working with to create procedural justice frameworks. So even as a partner, I'm stressed out, right? Because my leadership is leaving. And both offices, there was a moment where they thought maybe they would even leave the program because they're thinking, I'm not going to be in charge in a little bit, so never mind. And so what we've decided to do is create sort of scaffolding, sustainability scaffolding. So just to help them, and this is a pretty low bar, but we're going to try, right? To help them start documenting all of their policies and practices and sort of codifying this culture they've created and creating, I say scaffoldings, but like a crosswalk for the new leadership to take over so that there's sort of a handbook when the new person takes over. This is how we've been doing it. This is what we've learned. These are our partners. And also, we've noticed that when the progressive prosecutors leave, they're trying to get people within the office to take over the role, right? So he's been the second in command, and now he'll take over. But I do think that this is one of the biggest problems we have with this issue is how do you sustain this over time? And this is why I'm really excited why Rodrigo is going to come and talk to you, because Rodrigo is in business. He works in School of Management. He works in the School of Business, and he's all about leadership. And this is what he's trying to figure out, like, okay, how do we sustain this over time, over different leaders? Because we do know that for the culture to change, you need the leadership to continue to be on board. So I would say to you, and honestly, I think we're still exploring this a little bit, but certainly getting everything you can done while you're there. You're like, get the website updated, make sure your policies are written. And certainly some people are gonna come in and change policies, but if you have a staff that's already bought in and only the leadership is changing, hopefully they'll continue to move it forward. I hope that answers your question. Okay, great. So you really were asking sort of about internal procedural justice and how you change the culture. And that I'm sort of what we call the argument, the bad apple argument, which is like the whole tree is, so say you have a fruit tree and there's one bad piece of fruit. We say, well, it's not that the whole tree is rotten, it's that that piece of fruit is rotten. And this is sort of the way in the United States, there are different ways of talking about this, but there's a group of people and they call it the bad apple argument, which is that the institution is not corrupt, but there are players within the institution that are corrupt, and they need to experience, this has to do sort of with your question too, they have to experience a sort of accountability and not have a chance to like infect the entire office. So as I mentioned, some of these progressive prosecutors will just literally get rid of them. They'll fire them. They'll say it's creating too much tension in the office. You have a reputation. People don't want to work with you. People don't trust you. So we are going to ask you. We're going to make you leave. That's one way to do it. And there's just another way that is having to do with internally taking the time to train people and see if you can get behavior change over time. I find that a lot of time the internal conflict has to do with people not feeling heard and not feeling respected, and so they're acting out. Not in every case, right? But in some cases, I think people just need an opportunity to share what's been grieving them before they can start to change themselves. That's kind of a hard question. I hope I gave you some sort of, and we can talk more. Okay. And then for you had a really great question, which was sort of had to do with like, how do you incentivize people to obey the law when maybe they are, or comply with the law, even when they are in a position of authority, when maybe they are benefiting from not following the law, so maybe some corruption there or whatever. I'll say one of the ways we do this is that certainly being a police officer is a dangerous job. It is in the United States, it is in Mexico, and most people do not want to go to work and feel in danger. So one way we've gotten buy-in with the police around legitimacy and procedural justice is we focus on officer well-being. We focus on their safety, their stress levels, their health. Police in the United States have very high suicide rates. They have high rates of divorce. They have high rates of depression. All of these things, and we try to make them understand, listen, if you have a healthier relationship with your community, with the people you're interacting with, your job's not going to feel so hard. It's not going to feel so, you're not going to feel so desperate. So we do really try to focus on, well-being of the actor as well as, the community member. And that seems to resonate with people on a personal level. As far as attracting billionaire donors, I'm still trying to figure it out myself. They seem to be fickle, I don't know. But I think, what I've heard, the Center, for Constitutional Studies is going to start doing things like survey. And I think if you can start showing that there is a national understanding of legitimacy, first of all, right? First, you have to show that people understand these concepts and they support them and understand the way judges are perceiving these things, the way the community is perceiving them. Information is power, and I think if you can start by collecting more information, more survey, you'll hopefully be able to get, more momentum for social change as we have. And it is a social movement. You have to understand that a lot of the progressive prosecutor movement is rooted in the civil rights movement. I mean, this is decades of work people have been doing to create a system that's more fair in our country. So. But a lot of scholars, a lot of activists have dedicated their careers to getting more information that can then be used to get grants, to get funding, to get support. Okay.
Muy bien. ¿Tenemos alguna otra pregunta en la audiencia? Creo que no. A mí me gustaría aprovechar, Caroline, para hacer una última pregunta.
Oh, sí.
Just one last question. Yeah.
Okay.
No, me gustaría nada más preguntar cuál ha sido la respuesta social al movimiento de las fiscalías progresistas. O sea, ¿ha sido una respuesta positiva? ¿Los fiscales han sido reelegidos? ¿O más bien se ha identificado un backlash, una resistencia a ese tipo de políticas? Y la segunda pregunta ya para terminar, como bien sabes, en México la mayoría de las fiscalías tienen autonomía, ¿no? Y eso implica que muchos de los controles tradicionales, democráticos, que existían cuando pertenecían formalmente al Poder Ejecutivo, no están necesariamente ahí. Entonces, ¿cuál es tu opinión sobre la autonomía de las fiscalías y cómo en todo caso puede ser utilizada esta autonomía para promover la legitimidad y no más bien como un mecanismo para profundizar la opacidad o la arbitrariedad? Listo.
Okay. Gracias. Okay, so as far as sort of social acceptance of the progressive prosecutor movement, it's no secret that the United States is very polarized right now between the left and the right, progressive and conservative. And I would say that historically, criminal justice reform and public safety has been a very bipartisan issue, right? People tend to get behind this on both sides. So we are seeing places that are traditionally conservative, municipalities voting for progressive prosecutors and keeping them in office. And we also have seen as much as funders are funding progressive elections, the opposite. Conservative funders are putting up candidates to run against them. Again, it's politics, it's the election, people have different ideals. The good news is that we've been able to show that you can maintain public safety while prioritizing legitimacy. You do not have to sacrifice safety and lowering crime rates while having trust in the system and having progressive leadership. So that's good, right? It supports people over time. There have been some very, unfortunately, very public elections of progressive prosecutors who have been kicked out very quickly because they came in on platforms that were very strong in reform and they didn't deliver, and there was simultaneous some increase in violent crime, some public safety concerns, and as soon as they were in, they were out. So the good news is that people are paying attention. The bad news is that now people are paying attention, right? And so they want to hold the prosecutors who are elected accountable. So it's a mixed bag, but I think that's more reflective of the country at large than this particular movement. As far as autonomy, it's hard. In the States, our prosecutors have a ton of autonomy. They have a lot of discretion, and it's really hard to study discretion. How do you get inside of someone's mind and figure out why they are making the decisions they are making, why they're offering certain pleas? I think the summation of my talk is that I find autonomy to be actually hopeful for legitimacy, because it allows people to have their own beliefs and apply them in a scientific way to their fields. There needs to be constraints, and that's why our system has been designed, hopefully, to have constraints. But when you have years of a system like prosecutors that have so much discretion, sometimes that autonomy is going to lean the wrong way. But in this case, these prosecutors have used their autonomy to prioritize reform that increases legitimacy. So it's worked out well in that case. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Caroline. En primer lugar, agradecerte mucho que hayas aceptado la invitación. Agradecer que hayas aceptado venir a México y compartir con nosotros tu tiempo, tu conocimiento. Muchas gracias a nombre del Centro de Estudios Constitucionales. Y pues anunciarles que, como ya también comentó Caroline, vamos a tener 2 sesiones más del ciclo de conferencias hacia una justicia legítima con la profesora Tracy Mears y con el profesor Rodrigo Canales, y que invitarles a que estén atentos para las fechas de estas sesiones. Y bueno, simplemente cerrar agradeciéndoles a todas las personas que nos acompañaron esta tarde en el auditorio y a todas las personas que nos siguieron por la plataforma de Casas de la Cultura Jurídica y por las distintas redes sociales de la Suprema Corte de Justicia. Sin más, muchas gracias y que tengan muy buena noche. Hasta luego.